I never thought I'd receive a text like this from my 8-year-old son. Mom, Grandpa showed me something weird today. I don't want to see it again. My heart pounded as I read those words over and over. Something felt terribly wrong. The text was simple yet drenched with urgency that sent chills through me. I had left Ethan with my father-in-law earlier that day. A simple visit with someone I trusted completely. My son adored his grandfather, and I thought nothing of leaving them alone for the afternoon. Paul had always been the perfect grandfather. He spoiled Ethan with toys, took him on special outings, and always made time for him. My husband, Mark, often said how grateful he was that his father was so involved in Ethan's life, especially since we both worked demanding jobs. But now, this text. This weird thing. What did he mean? Was it just a misunderstanding? A child's innocent way of describing something confusing? Or was it something worse? The thought of something happening to my baby made me unable to breathe. My hands trembled as I reread the message. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Paul had shown him a movie that was too mature, or maybe they'd watched something on the news that scared Ethan. But deep in my gut, something screamed that this was different. This was wrong. I couldn't sit there any longer. I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. Every second felt like a lifetime as I drove through traffic, my mind racing with possibilities. I tried calling my husband. No answer. He was in a meeting at work. Panic tightened its grip on me as I realized I was handling this alone. Just calm down, I told myself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. It's probably nothing. Kids say things all the time. But the doubt kept creeping in, and that maternal instinct, the one that had never failed me, was screaming that something was terribly wrong. I pulled into the driveway of Paul's house, my mind racing with scenarios. The front door was open, which was unusual for him. He was always careful about security. The house was eerily still, and I could hear a faint murmur coming from inside, something I couldn't quite place. My heart stopped. It wasn't my son's voice. I pushed open the door and called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Ethan, where are you, baby? Silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I heard small footsteps. I found him in the hallway, standing by the den door, looking small and fragile. He was still in his school clothes, but something was different about his posture. He was gripping the doorknob tightly, and terror was clear in his eyes, an expression I'd never seen on my happy, carefree son's face before. Sweetheart, I whispered, kneeling down to his level. My voice was shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. What's wrong? What happened? You sent me that text. He avoided my eyes, staring at the floor instead. His lip was quivering, and I could see he was trying not to cry. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, and the words shattered everything I thought I knew about our family. Grandpa showed me something. Bad. He told me I needed to watch it, that boys need to learn these things when they get older. My blood ran cold. Every protective instinct I had screamed that something was horribly wrong. This wasn't about an inappropriate movie or a scary news story. This was something else entirely. I pulled him into my arms, holding him tight against my chest. What did he show you, Ethan? I asked softly, fighting to keep my voice steady and reassuring. You can tell Mommy anything, you know that, right? I don't know what it was, Mommy. It was on his phone. There were people doing weird things. I didn't want to look, but he made me sit next to him and watch. He said if I was a good boy, I would learn. I felt nauseated. My mind spun, struggling to process his words while trying to maintain my composure for his sake. I thought I knew my father-in-law, thought I could trust him completely with my most precious possession. But now everything was in question. How long had this been going on? What else had happened that Ethan hadn't told me about? "Where is Grandpa now, sweetie?" I asked, looking around nervously. "He went to the kitchen to get us snacks. He said we were going to watch more after we ate." The thought of Paul planning to show my son more explicit content made my stomach lurch. I had to get Ethan out of there immediately. As I stood to leave with Ethan in my arms, I heard heavy footsteps behind me. My entire body tensed as a familiar voice spoke, a voice that had once felt safe and warm, but now sent chills down my spine. "Where do you think you're going with my grandson?" It was Paul, and his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. I turned, slowly, instinctively holding Ethan tighter. Paul was standing in the doorway, blocking our exit, with a plate of cookies in his hands. But his usual grandfatherly smile was gone, replaced by something that made my skin crawl. "We're going home." "Paul," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Ethan has school tomorrow." "But we weren't finished with our lesson," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Boys need to learn about these things, Sarah. You and Mark have been too sheltered with him. The world isn't all sunshine and rainbows." Ethan whimpered in my arms, pressing, his face against my shoulder. "Grandpa, please, I don't want to watch anymore. I want to go home with Mommy." Paul's expression darkened. "Don't be such a baby, Ethan. This is important. Your father learned these things from me when he was your age, and look how he turned out." The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. Had he done this to Mark too? How far back did this go? I felt sick thinking about what my husband might have endured as a child. Suddenly, all the red flags I'd ignored came flooding back with crystal clarity. The special outings he insisted on taking Ethan on alone, always making excuses for why I couldn't come. The inappropriate comments about Ethan becoming a man that were always just on the edge of acceptable. The way he'd insert himself into every aspect of our parenting decisions. The expensive gifts that made us feel indebted to him. I had made excuses for him because he was family. We all had. But family doesn't do this to children. I stepped toward the door, my voice gaining strength. "Get out of our way, Paul. We're leaving, now." He didn't move. Instead, he set the cookies down and stepped closer, his presence suddenly menacing. "You don't understand what you're doing, Sarah. You're overreacting to a simple education lesson. Ethan needs to understand how the world works." "What I understand," I said, my voice rising despite my fear, "is that you showed my 8-year-old son pornography. There is no universe in which that's acceptable." "Don't be dramatic. It wasn't what?" I interrupted, my protective anger finally overriding my fear. "It wasn't explicit, it wasn't inappropriate. My son is traumatized, Paul. Look at him." Ethan was trembling in my arms, tears streaming down his face. The sight of my baby in such distress because of someone who was supposed to protect him filled me with a rage I'd never experienced before. "You have no right to make decisions about what my son sees or learns," I continued, my voice deadly calm now. "You are not his parent. You crossed a line that can never be uncrossed." Paul's facade finally cracked completely. "You think you know better than me? I've been raising children longer than you've been alive. Sometimes tough love is necessary." "This isn't tough love, Paul. This is abuse. And it ends now." I pushed past him toward the door, but he grabbed my arm. "You're making a huge mistake, Sarah. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." I yanked my arm free and turned to face him one last time. "The only mistake I made was trusting you with my son. But that mistake ends today. You will never see Ethan again. And if you try to contact us, if you try to come near our family, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what you are." With Ethan clinging to me, I walked out of that house and never looked back. Back at home, I knew that confronting Paul wasn't enough. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable evidence that would protect Ethan and potentially other children. My hands were still shaking as I tried to think clearly about what to do next. I remembered that Paul often used our home computer when he visited, claiming his own was too slow. He'd spent hours on it during his last visit just 2 weeks ago, saying he was researching vacation spots for a trip he wanted to take with Ethan. The thought of that trip now made me feel sick. I went to Mark's old laptop in our home office, the one we kept for guests and general family use. My heart was pounding as I opened the browser and navigated to the history. What I found there made my stomach lurch and confirmed my worst fears. Months, maybe years of disturbing searches filled the screen. Age-appropriate sex education for young boys. That one seemed innocent enough at first glance. But then there were others. Videos to show curious boys, teaching materials for children, and progressively more explicit searches that made me want to vomit. The sheer volume was overwhelming. This wasn't a recent development or a momentary lapse in judgment. This had been going on for a long time, and it was clearly planned and deliberate. I clicked on one of the bookmarked links with trembling fingers and immediately wished I hadn't. It was exactly what I feared. Explicit content that had clearly been curated specifically for showing to children under the guise of education. The fact that it was bookmarked meant Paul had returned to it multiple times. I quickly took screenshots of everything: the browser history, the bookmarked sites, the cached images. Every piece of evidence had to be documented before it could be deleted or lost. My photographer training from college came in handy as I methodically captured every angle, every timestamp, every detail that might be relevant. When my husband Mark arrived home from work, his face was already pale with confusion. He'd gotten my frantic voicemails but hadn't been able to leave his client meeting. "Sarah? What's going on? Is Ethan okay?" he asked, dropping his briefcase and looking around frantically. There was no easy way to say it, no gentle way to destroy someone's perception of their father. "Mark, you need to sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to change everything." I showed him Ethan first, who was coloring quietly in the living room but still jumping at every sound. Then I took Mark to the computer and showed him everything I'd found. He showed him Mark. He showed Ethan explicit videos. "Your father did this to our son. I have all the proof right here." I watched my husband's face drain of color as he scrolled through the evidence. I saw disbelief flicker in his eyes, then denial, then horror, and finally a rage that matched my own. "That sick son of a bitch," he muttered, his hands clenching into fists. How could my own father? "I don't know," I said softly. "But we have to ask ourselves, Mark, did he ever do anything like this to you when you were young?" Mark's face went white, and I knew we had our answer even before he spoke. There were things I thought were normal because he was my father. Videos he showed me, books he gave me. He said it was education, that all fathers taught their sons these things. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Oh God, Sarah. I thought it was normal. I blocked so much of it out." In that moment, we both realized the true scope of what we were dealing with. This wasn't just about Ethan. This was a pattern of behavior that had been going on for decades. As I prepared to call the authorities, the front door slammed open with such force that the windows rattled. My heart leaped into my throat as Paul's voice boomed through our hallway, dark with rage and something that sounded like desperation. "Sarah! Mark!" His footsteps were heavy and quick as he stormed through our house without permission. "Where's my grandson? We need to finish our conversation." Mark immediately stepped between Paul and the rest of our family, his body tense and ready. "Dad, you need to leave. Right now. You've done enough damage." But Paul wasn't the composed, manipulative man from earlier. This was someone cornered and dangerous. His face was flushed, his eyes wild, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. "You don't understand what you're doing," Paul shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "I was helping that boy, teaching him important lessons that you're too weak to teach him yourself." "Get out of our house," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. "You're not welcome here." Instead of leaving, Paul stepped closer, and I could see the years of entitlement and control he'd held over our family bubbling to the surface. "You really think you can just cut me out? After everything I've done for this family? I paid for your wedding, helped with your down payment, bought Ethan's school supplies." "None of that gives you the right to abuse our child," Mark said, his voice shaking with controlled fury. "Abuse?" Paul laughed bitterly. "I'm the only one who cares enough about that boy to prepare him for the real world. You two live in a fantasy where children stay innocent forever. That's not how life works." I could hear Ethan crying from the other room, and every maternal instinct I had was screaming at me to protect him. I immediately dialed 911, not caring that Paul could hear every word. "This is Sarah Walker at 428 Maple Street. I need immediate police assistance. My father-in-law has been showing my 8-year-old son explicit sexual content, and he's now in our home making threats." Paul's face contorted with fury and panic. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Sarah. Do you have any idea what I can do to you? What I know about this family?" "What's that supposed to mean?" Mark demanded. "I have friends in high places. Judges, lawyers, people who owe me favors. You think some hysterical mother's accusations are going to stand up against my word? Against my reputation in this community?" The threat was clear, and for a moment I felt genuinely afraid. Paul had always been connected, always knew the right people, always seemed to have influence that extended beyond what his job should have provided. But then I looked at Ethan, cowering in the doorway, and my resolve hardened. "I don't care who you know, Paul. I have evidence, I have witnesses, and I have the truth. That's going to be enough." "We'll see about that," he snarled. "You have no idea what you've just started." The sound of sirens in the distance seemed to snap Paul back to reality. His face went from rage to calculation in an instant, and I realized he was weighing his options. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice more threatening in its calmness than it had been in his rage. "You think you can destroy me? I'll destroy you first. I'll make sure you never see that boy again. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of mother you really are." With that final threat hanging in the air, Paul stormed out of our house, but not before stopping at the door to deliver one last chilling message. "You have 24 hours to reconsider this, Sarah. After that, all bets are off." The police arrived within minutes of Paul's departure, and I met them on the porch with shaking hands but a determined voice. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Please come inside. It's about my father-in-law. He's been showing my 8-year-old son pornographic content, and I have evidence." Officer Martinez, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, immediately took charge. "Let's start from the beginning, Mrs. Walker. Tell me everything that happened." Inside, I showed the officers everything we'd discovered on the computer. They examined the browser history, the cached images, the bookmarked sites, their expressions, growing more serious with each click. "This is definitely criminal behavior," Officer Martinez confirmed. "We need to secure this computer as evidence immediately. We'll also need to conduct a forensic interview with your son." "Will that be traumatic for him?" Mark asked, his protective instincts matching my own. "We have specially trained officers who work with children. They know how to get the information we need while minimizing additional trauma," she assured us. The steady's child services specialist, Detective Johnson, arrived an hour later. He was a gentle man with grown children of his own, and he had a way of talking to Ethan that immediately put him at ease. "Hey there, buddy," he said, sitting down at Ethan's level. My name is Detective Johnson, but you can call me Mr. J if that's easier. I just want to talk to you about what happened with your grandpa today, okay? Ethan looked at me uncertainly, and I nodded encouragingly. It's okay, sweetheart. Mr. J is here to help us. What followed was the most heartbreaking hour of my life. Detective Johnson patiently and gently guided Ethan through his story, asking simple, age-appropriate questions that allowed my son to tell his truth without leading him or putting words in his mouth. Ethan told him about the videos, about how uncomfortable they made him feel, about how Paul had insisted he watch, even when he didn't want to. He described how Paul had told him this was their special secret, and that big boys don't tell their mommies everything. Grandpa said if I told you, you might not let me visit him anymore, Ethan said, his voice small and scared. But I didn't like those pictures. They made my tummy feel funny. You did exactly the right thing by telling your mom, Detective Johnson assured him. You're very brave, Ethan, and you never have to see those pictures again. As Ethan spoke, I felt proud of my brave little boy for speaking his truth despite his fear, but I also felt guilty for not recognizing the signs earlier. How many visits had this happened during? How long had my son been carrying this secret? When the interview was finished, Detective Johnson spoke with Mark and me privately. Your son's statement is very clear and consistent. Combined with the digital evidence you've provided, we have a strong case. We'll be issuing a warrant for Paul Walker's arrest. What charges will he face? Mark asked. Multiple counts of child endangerment, distribution of explicit material to a minor, and potentially others depending on what our digital forensics team finds on his personal devices. Officer Martinez added, we're also going to check with other families in your extended network. Unfortunately, these behaviors rarely happen in isolation. The thought that other children might have been victimized made me feel sick, but it also strengthened my resolve. If speaking up could protect even one other child, then everything we were going through would be worth it. A week later, Detective Johnson called with an update that filled me with both relief and validation. We've made significant progress in the case, he said. Paul Walker was arrested this morning at his home. During the search, we found extensive evidence on his personal devices, thousands of images and videos, many specifically categorized as educational material for boys. We've also discovered communications with other individuals involved in similar activities. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could breathe freely. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. Paul was part of a larger network, and his arrest would potentially protect countless other children. What happens now? I asked. He's been charged with multiple felonies. Given the evidence we've gathered, his attorney is already discussing plea options, but the district attorney is pushing for the maximum penalties. The family's reaction to Paul's arrest was swift and divisive. Some family members immediately rallied behind him, accusing me of overreacting and destroying the family over a misunderstanding. Others remained suspiciously silent, and I wondered if they knew more than they were letting on. Mark's sister called within hours of the news breaking. Sarah, how could you do this to our family? Dad made a mistake, but destroying him publicly isn't the answer. A mistake? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He showed pornography to an 8-year-old child. That's not a mistake. It's a crime. You could have handled this privately. Now our family name is ruined. Your family name should be ruined, I replied coldly. And if you're more concerned about reputation than protecting children, then maybe you need to examine your priorities. But not all reactions were negative. Mark's younger brother called to apologize and share his own disturbing memories from childhood. I always thought what Dad did was normal, he admitted. I blocked a lot of it out, but now... Sarah, thank you for being brave enough to speak up. My mother-in-law's call came 3 days after the arrest. Her voice was shaky and filled with a pain I recognized. The pain of realizing you've been blind to something horrible happening right under your nose. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I mean, there were signs, weren't there? Things I should have seen. I'm not interested in apologies right now, I said honestly. I'm focused on protecting Ethan and making sure Paul can never hurt another child. I understand, but please know that some of us support what you're doing. It took courage to speak up against family. Her words helped, but they didn't erase the isolation I felt from much of Mark's extended family. The people who should have been protecting children were instead protecting their abuser. The trial began 4 months later, and I had never been more nervous in my life. Despite all our evidence, Paul's expensive legal team was doing everything possible to discredit our story and paint me as an overprotective, hysterical mother. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Paul's attorney began, this case is about a grandmother's simple attempt to educate his grandson being twisted by an overwrought mother into something sinister. But our prosecutor, District Attorney Rebecca Chen, was prepared for these tactics. She methodically presented the digital evidence, the expert testimony about the psychological impact on children, and most powerfully, the testimony of other victims who had come forward. 3 other young men, now adults, testified about their experiences with Paul during their childhood. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar to what had happened to Mark and Ethan, the same educational justifications, the same secrecy, the same gradual escalation of inappropriate content. When it came time for Ethan's testimony, the judge allowed him to testify via closed-circuit television to minimize trauma. I sat with him in a separate room as he answered the prosecutor's gentle questions. Ethan, do you remember what Grandpa showed you on his phone? D.A. Chen asked. Yes, Ethan said quietly. It was people doing things that made me uncomfortable. I asked him to turn it off, but he said I needed to learn. How did it make you feel? Scared and sad. I didn't want to watch, but he said I had to be a big boy. Did he tell you to keep it secret from your parents? Yes. He said it was our special thing, and that Mommy might not understand because she's a girl. The innocence in his voice contrasted with the horrible content he was describing was devastating. I could see several jury members wiping away tears. Paul's defense tried to paint the explicit material as educational resources and suggested that his intent was misunderstood. But the volume of evidence against him was overwhelming, and his own digital communications revealed the calculated nature of his actions. The trial lasted 2 weeks. When the jury returned with their verdict after only 3 hours of deliberation, I knew we had won before they even spoke. On the charge of child endangerment in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of distributing explicit material to a minor, we find the defendant guilty. The guilty verdicts kept coming, each one feeling like a weight being lifted from my chest. When the judge sentenced Paul to 8 years in prison with mandatory registration as a sex offender, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice and protection. Paul would never hurt another child, and that knowledge gave me peace. The months following the trial were challenging but hopeful. Ethan was working with a wonderful child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, and slowly but surely, I could see my happy, carefree little boy emerging again. How are you feeling today, buddy? I asked him one morning as he got ready for school. Good, Mom. I had a dream last night, but it wasn't scary. I dreamed we went to the zoo and you and Dad were there and we saw the elephants. Those were the moments that mattered, when I could see that the trauma wasn't defining him, that he was healing and moving forward. Mark and I went through our own healing process, both individually and as a couple. Learning about his own childhood trauma was difficult, but therapy helped him understand that none of it was his fault, and that breaking the cycle of abuse was the most important thing he could do as a father. I couldn't stay silent about our experience. Other parents needed to know that predators don't always look like strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes they look like trusted family members who bring birthday presents and take your children to the park. I started speaking at parent education, events, sharing our story, and teaching other parents about warning signs they might miss. The response was overwhelming. So many parents thanked me for giving them permission to trust their instincts, even when it meant confronting family members. One message in particular stood out. A mother from the next town over wrote to tell me that reading about our case in the newspaper gave her the courage to report her own father-in-law, who had been exhibiting similar behaviors with her daughter. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, she wrote. But your story showed me that trusting my gut was more important than keeping peace in the family. My daughter is safe now because you were brave enough to speak up. That message confirmed what I already knew. Speaking our truth hadn't just saved Ethan, it had potentially saved other children too. 2 years later, as I tucked Ethan into bed, after a normal day full of school, friends, and laughter, he looked up at me with those bright eyes that had once been so full of fear. Mom, do you remember when I sent you that text about Grandpa? I do, sweetheart. Do you want to talk about it? He shook his head. Not really. I just wanted to say thank you for believing me. And for making me safe. Those simple words from my brave little boy meant more to me than any legal victory or public recognition ever could. He felt safe. He trusted that his parents would protect him. He knew his voice mattered. You know you can tell me anything, right? I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. No matter what it is, no matter who it's about, I will always believe you, and I will always protect you. I know, Mom, I love you. I love you too, buddy. Sweet dreams. As I turned off his light and closed his door, I reflected on how much our family had changed. We had been through something horrible, something that could have destroyed us. But instead, it had made us stronger, more aware, and more committed to protecting not just our own child, but other children who might not have advocates. Mark appeared beside me in the hallway, slipping his arm around my waist. How's he doing? He's good. Really good. He's healing. We all are, Mark said softly. Sarah, I need you to know how grateful I am. If you hadn't trusted your instincts that day, if you hadn't been willing to confront my father— We did it together, I interrupted. We protected our son together. Yeah, we did, and we'll keep protecting him no matter what. Looking back on everything we'd been through, I realized that the text message that had started it all— Mom, Grandpa showed me something weird today. I don't want to see it again— had been the most important message I'd ever received. It had been my son's cry for help, and I had answered it. Our family had been tested in the worst possible way, but we had come through it stronger and more united than ever. We had learned that protecting our children was worth any sacrifice, any difficult conversation, any broken relationship. Most importantly, we had shown Ethan that his voice mattered, that adults would listen to him, and that he never had to suffer in silence. Those lessons would serve him for the rest of his life. Trust your parental instincts. When something feels wrong, investigate immediately. Protect your children at all costs, even when it means confronting trusted family members or facing difficult truths. Your child's safety and well-being are worth more than maintaining relationships built on secrets, manipulation, or abuse. Children's voices matter, and they deserve adults who will believe them and fight for them.